All right, welcome back to Parago Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark. I'm your host, Katie Culpa, and today we have a special treat in store for all of our curious listeners. Joining us on this eerie expedition into the realms of the unknown are the hosts of the Unsolved Canadian Mysteries, a podcast that's dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of Canada's unsolved true crime, UFO sightings, ghostly encounters, really a little bit of everything. But before we dive into the fascinating stories that they've brought to share with us, let's take a moment to learn more about Kenton and Dylan and the captivating journey they've embarked on together with their own podcast. All right, Kenton and Dylan, could each of you introduce yourselves and then kind of just tell our listeners a little bit about your podcast?
So, my name is Kenton DeYoung. I'm one of the co-hosts of Unsolved Canadian Mysteries. How should we do it? I say me, you say you, and then we talk about the podcast.
This is my favorite thing is Kenton just overthinks everything. And he's
How
like,
do we do this?
No, is this your turn now? I'm Dylan. I'm the co-host of Unsolved Canadian Mysteries.
Our podcast, we talk about mysteries across Canada. They kind of venture from the totally wacky UFO alien abduction stories to true crime, to monsters, cryptids, legends, whatever kind of unsolved crime we can think about. We've had some fairy things on there. We've had aliens,
Bears,
mummies, ocean monsters,
bear attacks.
Yeah.
I even saw the bears on your website, the comment about bears.
When in doubt, bears.
Bears.
we did one story where we talked about like a guy up north who went kind of crazy and committed murder, and the RCMP tracking him down, and like this really crazy out of body experience.
Yeah.
And we threw in like a bear reference.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy who told me about the story, listened to the podcast, he's like, "What's with the bears?" Like, nothing, man. Don't worry about the bears.
Obviously, he needs to do more research about bears.
Hey, there's bears everywhere. Could be.
Yes.
Could be. Mm-hmm. Well, like I said, it's great having you on and being the first guest episode of Parago Paranormal, which will be awesome. Cool. I guess, and what kind of made you guys decide to start the podcast? I'm curious.
Kenton likes to talk about crazy stuff, and I'm good at making podcasts. Here we are.
The perfect pair.
Yeah. It's so funny because like we weren't even supposed to do a podcast. Kenton was just like, hey, do you want to do a video where we talk about I got this story about Taylor Granger. It's like a UFO story. And I'm like, okay, sure, I can film it in my basement if you want and do audio for it and we could post it. He's like, okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, we made a video. We had no intention of doing a podcast, but then we liked doing it. So then we just kept on going, and just like 1 turned to 2, turned to 8, turned to almost 3 years kind of thing. It's good.
3 years already. Wow.
Almost. It's going to be 3 in a bit.
Dylan had a podcast before called Dino Boys. So he had lots of experience with podcasts. I didn't.
Yeah, I like how you referenced Dino Boys as being like the past podcast. Like that's my most failed podcast. But yes,
I didn't know he had more podcasts than that.
It's good. That's fine.
It still experience as a podcast, right?
Yeah.
It's like we have covered lots of different topics, but it's always hard. I find true crime is the hardest one. Mm-hmm. Like because we did the one about Granger Taylor, and the entire episode we called him Taylor Granger because his name is like it's so easily which one's the first and last one. So, but like, and no one called us out on that. No one said like, "Hey, by the way, you got his name wrong the entire time." But like, if we do a true crime episode and we miss out like an age, a date, a geographic location, like a road, we get the messages about it. So
really?
The monsters, but there's some passionate true crime.
True crime's a little more prude than the paranormal.
Yeah, and people will tell us when we get stuff wrong. We made one where we said that.
I like you say we.
Sorry?
I like how you keep on saying we. It's you,
We.
Kenton. I'm not making these people mad.
I made a comment about Justin Bieber being from London, Ontario, and someone was like, "He's not from London. He's from this other place." And I'm like, "He was born in London. Like, he moved when he was a kid. Like, I know." But we get the comments about the true crimes. We don't get the comments about the other ones. So who what they're listening to for sure.
Well, I guess we could talk about is Kenton, are you the one that does like all the research and
Yep.
stuff into these?
Sometimes, most of the time, but we now have Christina doing a lot of research
Mhm.
too.
Oh, okay.
She's done a couple, but the last few, I think those were me.
Can you share a glimpse of the chilling encounters and the tales that you've captivated on your audience with your podcast? Like before we started recording, you mentioned that you have a good ghost story that you want to share that's here in Canada.
Sure. Okay. So the ghost story one, I just stumbled upon it one day, and I was like, I've never heard this before in my life. And like I try to keep up to date with ghost stories or like especially the big ones, but this one was like it made newspaper headlines. It was well documented at the time, and I never heard of it. And I found like two websites that talked about it, and they said there's a book that where it's like a chapter in the book. So I went and I bought this book online. Took forever to get here. Got here after we finished the recording, and it's just like a page and a half. I was like, oh,
Oh,
that's it, huh? But like the bag came, and then like the book inside was like wrapped in another bag, and then even that was wrapped in another bag. And this
Mm.
book was like an old book. I opened it, and the spine just cracked. Every page, crack, crack, crack. So now the book is ruined. The
oh
book is
no.
it's no good. And it doesn't tell me anything you didn't already know. So we didn't miss out on that book being not a part of our podcast. But the story's crazy. It kind of starts off like in the middle where this family, the Pierce family, get a new house. And like they get in there and the wife says, something's weird about this house. And the kids say, I feel like I'm being watched all the time. And then as they're doing dishes that night, the story goes, a ghostly hand reaches out and touches one of the girls and she screams. So the dad, trying to calm them down, gets into bed, right? He notices that there's the floorboards have started to sag in the bedroom. So he goes to the kitchen and goes to the crawl space and sees, some of the boards have been cut over there. He's, oh, that's interesting. So he goes back to the bedroom and lifts up the floorboards, and they find a body underneath the floorboards.
Oh no way.
But the body has like,
Mummified.
yeah, mummified. It's crazy. And the body, the skull has like two holes in it. They say one hole looks like it's from like a impact, and then one hole looks like it's from rats or mice or something. And they talk about how he's still like his skin is just pulled back, although he's been there for like 30 years. Anyway, it opened this whole case up into this missing person from like 30 years ago, and they got like nothing on what happened to him. But anyways, that was a cool one because you got like the time period where mummies were a big thing, and this mummy idea came like it went across the country. Everyone's talking about this Calgary mummy because like I was trying to find out anything about this, and of course, you look at mummy in that time period, which is the 40s, I think it was, and you got like mummies in Egypt, mummies in South America with the Aztec, the Mayans. You got the mummies in Asia, and now we have mummies in Canada too.
Mm.
So like it was a fun one, and it was a cool topic that I had never heard about. So it was like a mummy story. Who's heard of a mummy story in Canada, right?
Well, yeah.
It's definitely not on brand.
I think we've covered just about every kind of critter that we've had: mummies, vampires, aliens, ghosts, uh, werewolves. We had the Wendigo, which isn't exactly a werewolf, but it's close in our episode of
It
it.
could be. Could be a werewolf.
We could
Yeah,
also
maybe.
do one about a werewolf too, but we've kind of ticked off all the Hollywood monsters.
Have you done like the Sasquatch one from like, isn't that British Columbia or something
We
somewhere?
haven't. And I think we did talk about it on one podcast just because I never want to cover like the most popular.
Yeah. He's like a cryptic hipster. Kenton is. He's just like, I was so into that when nobody was into it, and then it's just like what's the treasure one, Kenton?
The
The
Treasure Island, yeah, yeah.
yeah, what's that one called again? The
Uh, um,
see, he doesn't even remember.
is it? It's not just Treasure Island in Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah, what the heck is it called though? What's the island called?
Oak
Oh,
Island.
Oak
Oak
Island.
Island. Yeah.
So Kenton's just like, I'm just like, Kenton, I like pirates. Can we do one about pirates? And Kenton's like, yeah, there's one about pirates, but I don't want to do it because everyone talks about that.
Not cool to talk about what everyone talks about or
No,
what?
no, he needs to be the first on the scene.
Trying to do groundbreaking work, you know. Trying to find the news stories. Because we could cover the same one. Everyone's like, what was the other one? The lost mine, gold mine in Alberta. Everyone's done that one.
The lemon mine.
They lost my mind. That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And after we did the one about Nahanni National Park, like our second episode,
Yeah.
or third episode, I see it everywhere now. So I say we're like trailblazers on that story.
Trailblazers on the national park.
On the 150-year-old story in the
Yeah,
Northwest Territories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, since you've been doing all new ones, have you been able to like solve any of those mysteries or?
Absolutely. There is so many that I have simply solved with bears.
Yeah, actually, I think we probably got pretty close on the one about the mummy. We figured it was probably right before the Great Depression. We think that someone the guy, he was Thomas Hall, who was why they found. We figured it was probably because the story goes he was having cards with another guy a couple of days before he went missing. And when they finally did track down this other guy, he was this sickly old man in British Columbia because so much time had passed, right? And he was dying from cancer or something. So they didn't pursue the case anymore. They let it go. But we're like, we think what happened was he lost the card game or something like that, and he needed money because Thomas Hall had some oil rights. But then everything kind of fell apart, and we think the guy killed Thomas and then felt bad and buried the body and then took off.
Yeah, because the mummy had a big hole in his head, which looked like someone shot him in the back of the head.
Yeah. So we figured that's probably what happened. But they never solved it because the guy was so old. There's no point in like, what you gonna do? By the time the trial's over, he's probably already gonna be dead. So like,
probably
just because someone's old doesn't mean they can't be prosecuted.
It's true.
Yeah. So at least say what happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then you also said you had a good UFO story you wanted to share about, right?
Yeah. So this one, we wanted to come back to Saskatchewan for it because we spent a lot of time in Alberta or Ontario or Quebec the last couple of episodes, so that we'll bring it back home. And it was about the Langenberg UFO incident in 1979. I think it was 8, something like that. And pretty much there was this farmer, Edwin Fuhr, and we make a joke about the name on the podcast because I don't want to say Fuhr because it sounds like Fuhrer. So Edwin, we'll just call him by his first name, was out combining, threshing his field, and he saw some metallic objects on the field. And he goes up to see them, describes them, and ultimately they end up flying away. And he goes home and tells his family, and his family tell the RCMP. The RCMP come and start looking into it, and then it makes headlines, and then everyone comes to come look into these things. Like tourists come in on airplanes and land on neighbor fields. They have military flying over. They have people calling him all hours all the day. Apparently, he got a phone call from Neil Armstrong too, talking about aliens and his experience on the moon. That apparently has been scrubbed from official records. So I was like, I didn't know Neil Armstrong had an alien experience on the moon. That's super cool.
Neither did I.
Right?
Interesting.
Like a couple years ago, they put out this thing where it was like a website where there was the Earth and then like a line to the moon, and you could listen to all the broadcasts they did between Armstrong and Houston on the whole way there. And that was never in that broadcast. I listened to the whole thing. There was no aliens on that thing. So that was a great story. And what's cool about the local ones is that you can call the people, be like, hey, I'm from Regina, I'm looking into this story. And sometimes they're receptive, sometimes they think you're crazy, they don't want to talk to you. In this case, Edwin is older, He was older then, and now he's 50 years older now, so he's not in a condition to be interviewed, which is a shame. But
Yeah.
there are interviews from him from like 10 years ago that I referenced for the podcast, so I could kind of talk to his past, you know.
Yeah, Kenton calls around and like he called the house and he's just like, "Hi, I'm here to ask some questions." And she's like, "Okay," like she thought he was like a telemarketer or something.
Yeah.
And then Kenton's like, "No, no, no, it's about the alien encounter." And then the lady starts laughing at him on the phone. He's like, "He's in a home now."
Oh.
And then Kenton was like, "Okay, do I call the home or do I just leave it as it is?" He decided to
Yeah,
leave.
like I asked, you know, just curious, like, is it a home in Langenberg or is it in like Regina or Saskatoon or something? And she's like, it's here, but I wouldn't call it. I'm like, I'm not gonna call him there. Just wondering.
Kenton
God,
just
this
shows up.
ends here. Like, I'm not
Excuse
gonna
me.
pursue this.
Go interview him.
Yeah. 40 years later, it's just like, I tried to avoid you people this whole time, and now you found me again.
That was like the one I called in Will Know. We were looking
Oh,
into
the vampires. Yeah,
yeah,
this
the
is
vampire
Kenton's
story.
got like no. Kenton actually like has no fear. I just because we did this one where we went to this cemetery that's haunted, and I'm just following Kenton around with a camera. And he's got no sense of like danger. Like if we were walking down a hallway and there was like dripping blood down the walls, he'd just be like, "Oh, that's kind of weird. You think that's has something to do with the plumbing?" And I'm like, "No, Kenton, it's blood dripping down the walls. This place is possessed." And you're like, "Oh, interesting. Well, let's go deeper." Like that's literally Kenton. Anyway, sorry, go on, Kenton.
No, it's true. That was so funny at the cemetery. We're walking through like the woods and we couldn't see anything. It was so dark. We were tripping on all the branches. And like there could have been anything in there with us. Like we're on the edge of the most haunted cemetery in Saskatchewan. There's these stories of these giant
Oh.
monsters, bird creatures living in the woods.
Yeah, which he tells me after we get there. It's like, so what are all this stuff? All those bird creatures swooping down. Like, what?
Like shadowy monsters and amongst the graves, like, and we just walk through it. Like, oh, let's
Yeah.
just go for a walk through the woods.
Anyway, you called the vampire people.
Yeah. So I got this document. I heard about it, and then I went out and got it off Amazon. This like retracted Government of Canada report about these vampires that are plaguing the town of Wilno, Ontario. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. So I do research, and like, there's the Historical Society, and they don't talk about this at all. And I'm like, this is a big deal. Like, you guys get headlines about this every year. So I called them up, and I'm like, I got one question. Are the vampires real? She's like, well, what did she say? Oh, she said, I don't want to talk about it. I think that's what she said. It's like, so that's a yes. Or she said something like, we don't want to talk about it. Or it was a very vague statement. You think if it was just no, she would
Yeah.
just say no. I was like, okay, thanks for the call, and I hung up. I'm like, there's no reason to ask anything more than that. That was a perfect
Yeah.
answer.
So I guess what would you say is your most memorable moment then for each of you guys on the podcast since it's almost 3 years, especially? That's crazy.
But like, yeah, episode wise, like our second episode about the national park with, because spoiler alert, which it's a super old story, but everyone loses their head. It's just like Kenton explaining something, like it's far away, but not so far away. Like it's in a different province, territory, or whatever happening, but it's just like the eeriness of what happened, like hundreds of people being found with no heads. Like, what happened?
I'm laughing because I remember in that episode where I was like, I talk about the guy coming in, and you were like, "Do they lose his head?" And I'm like, "Yeah, they did. They didn't have a head." That was a good one. I think my favorite was probably the vampire one, just because it's like, how often do you hear a vampire story, right? And the
Especially in
mummy,
Canada.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like the mummy one is cool, but like mummies are like a one-off thing. It's not like Mummies Alive, the old TV show where you have like 12 of them working together. It's like you get one mummy, but vampires, it's like a pact. You
Yeah,
always get a
especially like a
whole bunch of
town
them.
of vampires.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like this is like it could be a Netflix story. Like some of the ones we talked about, like this could be like a Netflix
Yeah.
series.
And some
Yeah,
of them
that's true.
are TV series that have gone on for like 7 seasons.
Yeah,
And
Oak Island, which
yeah,
is why I didn't want to cover it. Yeah, because how do you cover 7 seasons of a TV show plus the past 100 years of investigations?
You'd have lots to talk about at least, right?
It's a long podcast. Yeah,
Instead of trying to phone old folks' homes and asking for
Yes.
interviews.
Yes. Sometimes it's tricky because like you get a story and you think I could call museums, I could call researchers, I could get more details about this,
hmm
but there's going to be like so many people who want to talk about it or who's experienced things. It's like where do we say this is enough of a story that we have to cut it now? Like we could, for example, the one about Ogopogo, we could have gone way further. There's a guy over there who insists he's seen Ogopogo. He's been to the Ogopogo nest. He has pictures of the Ogopogo babies, the Ogo, I can't know what they call it, Ogo doggies, or like something. He has a name for them. We could have gone way down that rabbit hole, but it's like, does that solve the mystery at all, or is it just convoluted with unnecessary facts? So we just kind of cut it. I don't even think I talked about it, but I was like, we could,
Yeah.
but what's the point? Doesn't it adds to it, but does it add anything of value to it, you know?
So I guess what can listeners expect from your podcast in the future? What do you guys got planned? Anything you're willing to spill now?
we're gonna set Kenton on fire. That's coming up pretty quick here.
We are trying to do like we've been talking, but we did that on location one a couple of years ago. We want to do more of those, but they're a little harder to organize, right?
No, for sure, yeah.
We also probably want to do more Saskatchewan stories because those ones always do very well. But they kind of like whatever comes up. Like
Yeah.
we're not like trying to cover hit stories. Like let's say there's a crime that just got solved or one that just happened. We're probably not going to cover it because the time we get around to researching and editing and publishing, it's going to be like a month
Yeah.
or a couple weeks. We'd want to make it faster, but it's going to be a little ways. By then, the story's already evolved. So we usually cover the older ones just so that I'm not behind on the recent developments.
What we did one time though is we had Christina on, and we did it was for Halloween. It was on the Patreon, and each of us brought some like spooky stories. Kenton brought like actual mysteries though, so it was fine though. But we each like took times telling ours, but I didn't bring any. I just like made some up on the spot, which worked out. But I like doing improv, so that was my.
It was really good.
Unlike
really
Kenton.
Yeah.
I really liked that like the three of us sitting together, kind of like a town hall kind of thing. I think that was
We should do that again sometime.
yeah. I think it'd be cool to do that every once in a while just for the Patreon too, sit down and talk. It's funny because we put out a podcast. Just I think it was our last one. And it might have been, I'm not sure if it's Langtonburg or if it's the other one. But we got a comment on it that on Spotify, like we upload videos, but people usually just listen to the audios.
Mhm.
And someone said, "Oh my God, there's a video version of this," and they didn't know what we look like. I guess they must not follow us on social media or anything. So,
Oh.
like, they were surprised that Dylan has this whole head of amazing hair, and that they thought I was Asian, and I'm
Oh.
not. I'm not. So, it's always amazing to see, like, even though we've done 30 episodes about like people's realizations and they meeting us for the first time and that kind of thing. So it could be anything our next episode because we get all sorts of feedback from people.
Yep.
Sometimes they send us stories too. They're like, "Hey, cover this story." I was like, that's a solid story. Let's do it.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Let's do it that way.
Thank you for doing our work.
I was gonna say, isn't that nice? Hey,
Yeah.
recommending content. Awesome.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah.
Oh, that's too funny. Okay, I guess we should talk about where people can find your podcast in case anyone listening to this one wants to know where to find you.
Yeah, we sell it in VHS form behind 7-Eleven. So just find your local 7-Eleven. I'll be wearing like a red sweater.
There you go.
Kenton?
I don't have a VHS player.
No.
so-
no. Anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever. We have our YouTube as well.
We're also on Instagram, X, I guess it's called now, TikTok and Facebook, any kind of social media. We don't post that much on X, but it's hard, because
Yes.
what do we do on that platform now? But we're on all the other ones too, so you can often find us, and of course our website unsolvedmysteries.ca, where we post all the new episodes.
Is there anything else you guys want to share about upcoming episodes or changes to the podcast or just anything in general, I guess, before we wrap up?
In a perfect world, we would like to put out an episode every 2 weeks, so they can anticipate more episodes.
Mhm.
It's hard now. I'm busy with work. Dylan's busy with his work, but we want to do that. That's kind of like our goal. So, listeners, we're going to put out more stuff. It's coming out frequently, and even more so if we can get our acting gear. Mostly me, who has to get his acting gear. So there'll be more episodes, probably rapid fire, going out. Hopefully, every few weeks. We have Christine on the team now as an editor, which is making a huge difference, big impact on the team. And we want to do more guests, like how you're having us on yours. We want people on ours too. We were
Mhm.
talking about having some interviewers on about a ghost story in Saskatchewan. There'll probably be a next episode or a couple from now. We have to organize it. So we want to have more incorporations with people, more interviews with people, because that's kind of like Dylan and I talking. That's great, but once you can bring in another voice, a voice of actual authority, it kind of makes it that much more of a impact.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today's episode. So that we'll have to conclude our captivating journey through the mysteries of Canada's unsolved true crime, UFO sightings, ghostly encounters, and I guess bears, right? A huge thank you to our special guests from Unsolved Canadian Mysteries, Kenton and Dylan, for joining us on this exploration into the unknown.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Thanks again, Kalia. Really
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it.
us.
Yeah, for sure. Listeners, make sure you check out Unsolved Canadian Mysteries for more thrilling adventures through Canada's history. As you can tell, you'll learn a little bit about everything, not just paranormal or urban legends. And to our loyal listeners of Perigo Paranormal Discoveries from the Dark, thank you for tuning in and embarking on this haunting journey with us. Remember, the unknown is always waiting to be explored, and we'll be back with more spine-chilling stories and deep dives into the paranormal soon.